Okay. All right, great. Yeah, so just kind of happy to mention that John has been working on a project to connect archive space and Preservica, and utilizes a lot of Python, including PySimpleGUI. Um, and would like to kind of present on some of the work that he's been doing for that. He's from the University of Rochester, I believe, and is the digital asset lead, is my understanding. Feel free to expand on anything there, John, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm the digital asset management lead at the University of Rochester, which for our purposes is kind of a repository manager and digital preservation librarian sort of rolled into one. So yeah, I will share my screen. I've got a short presentation and then a demo to do to kind of go over what I've been working on. Okay. And okay. So the idea here is to kind of demonstrate a tool that was developed using PySimpleGUI, adapting a kind of a batch of script that I had developed to manage ingest into our digital preservation platform, and then to sync that with a metadata management system, in this case, archive space. And kind of the central tenet here is to kind of look at ways that you can make sort of the code that we write a little bit more accessible to folks who might be kind of downright terrified of the command line, or just don't have the kind of like the bandwidth and the time and the space in order to learn tools like Python. Also, just to even more fundamental, setting the stage sort of thing, I am very much a librarian. I am not a software developer. I've learned Python just to try and kind of automate my work. But that has been one of the really interesting things about learning PySimpleGUI in particular, is just to get some like really rudimentary ideas of what's actually involved with software design, which has been kind of interesting. So first, kind of getting into exactly what the sort of the problem that we're trying to solve here at the University of Rochester. We have Preservica as a digital asset management system in our digital preservation platform. And then we have Archive Space as a metadata management system specifically for our special collections department. We also use Alma Primo, for instance, but we haven't been able, and that's kind of an enhancement we'd like to look at in the future, is how we sync that metadata up with Preservica as well, so that things don't drift, so metadata doesn't drift. So our desired end state is to be able to ingest digital assets into Preservica programmatically, and then sync that metadata up with Preservica from archive space, so that it's automatic, so that you don't have to go in and update metadata in multiple places, where inevitably it'll drift and just become kind of incomprehensible. So there's a lot of resources available to do this. Luckily, in this case, Preservica has what is called an out-of-the-box solution that they've developed. It's not quite out of the box as they might claim. It requires quite a bit of configuration, and there's a lot of different ways that it can be utilized. But what it does provide is two workflows that are enabled in Preservica once you have it set up. A one-time workflow to kind of like sync up, or to provide an initial linkage between digital assets and their corresponding records in archive space, and then a nightly scheduled workflow that runs around 1 o'clock in the morning, see if there's any changes, and then pull them down into the preservation system. So all of this was created by Preservica using the Archive Space API. As far as I know, Lyrasis or any of the developers of Archive Space don't have any involvement with this project at all. It's all API driven. And the other big resources that's available that isn't used for the pre-ingest part of this, but is used in the post-ingest part, is there's a developer at Preservica, I think his name's James Carr, who kind of created a Python library called PyPreservica that wraps the Preservica APIs into a lot more accessible Python library that's much simpler to use. Since this is more about kind of like using PyPreservica, or using PySimpleGUI to kind of wrap around our scripts, I won't get too detailed into all of the data modeling aspects of this, but just to kind of briefly go over it, mostly the point I want to get across here is that it is both bespoke and fiddly. So Preservica has both a structure in how the data needs to be modeled in order to be ingested properly into Preservica, and has its own bespoke metadata schema. So for the data side of things, it's called preservation asset exchange format, or PAX, which describes how the assets need to be structured. This is the bottom half of this page shows kind of their bog standard example that they use in a blog post describing these different technologies. So mostly it's just to get across that like kind of trying to set this up manually is a real pain. You need to have a folder that represents the asset. Then inside that needs to be folders that represent any preservation assets and any access assets. And inside each of those, you have a folder for every single individual file. So if you have a complex digital object that has hundreds of pages in it, trying to structure all of that manually and then zip it up afterwards is just going to be a real pain. So doing this programmatically is really kind of the only way. Similarly, the metadata model is also kind of bespoke and fiddly. So Preservica doesn't use a standard metadata model like mods, DC, METs, any of those. Instead, they have something called the Open Preservation Exchange Format, or OPEX, which is why this utility is called the PAX OPEX utility. So it provides a lot of precision. Again, similar to PAX, you can be very exact on how you want to structure your assets, but nobody wants to handwrite XML, like they want to be able to do this by programmatically and at scale. So just kind of very briefly, it provides for a lot of functionality. There's 3 big sections to the OPEX metadata. There's a transfer section where you can specify fixities so that if assets get corrupted in transit, which is kind of nice, kind of providing the same sort of functionality as bags do, or I think OCFL as well, though I'm a little less familiar with that particular format. You can also provide manifests of files here too, so that again, checking to see whether everything is transferred properly. There's a property section that lets you specify things like title, description, and any arbitrary identifiers that you want to apply. If you have local identifiers that are being used, or for instance, on this, the code here and the long string, alphanumeric string, is the identifier that's assigned by archive space, that you can kind of pull that over and save that with the digital asset. And then finally, there's this descriptive metadata section at the end. This has like a tiny little metadata stub in here that's just used for the archive space sync, but you can actually embed entire Dublin core records or mods records or Mark XML, whatever you want in here, even multiple different metadata sheets, and those will also be carried over and displayed in Preservica. So you can kind of really dump a lot of things in there. For some records that we have coming from Islandora, there's like a Dublin core record, a mods record, a premise record we're generating, a FITS export record from getting some technical metadata, and linked up EAD from archive space. So you can really be verbose with your description if you want to. So that's all kind of the Preservica side of things. Now the last bit is the archive space side of things. In this case, we need to be able to pull metadata out of archive space that we can give to Preservica so it knows what to sync up to. So in this case, there's a great plugin that NYU developed that was originally meant to be able to create digitization work orders so that if, your archival reading room needs something digitized for a patron, then they could just kind of be able to easily programmatically spit out a spreadsheet of all the things that need to be digitized and hand it over to their imaging lab. The nice thing is, though, since it exports all that metadata in a spreadsheet in a very standard format, we can use that for our purposes too. So things like the archivable object number, which is present in the record URI, things like titles, that archive space identifier I mentioned before, and some other factors that we can then use to kind of feed into our scripts and be able to churn out useful metadata for Preservica's purposes, and then be able to sync it up to archive space. So this uses a fair number of libraries, but none of them are very complex. Everything from top to bottom is honestly mostly like OS and shell utility sort of functionality. There's some other stuff like HashLib gets used for generating checksums, or CSV gets used to output some file manifests and that sort of thing. But this is all fairly low level work. Zip file gets used to create the zipped PAX object that can be fed into Preservica. OpenPyXL gets used to parse that spreadsheet that I was just referring to, but none of this is kind of particularly advanced in a lot of ways. So just to give you a before and example, before and after state examples in screenshot form before we actually do this live, and I pray that nothing breaks. So this is designed to be as kind of simple as possible. You drop in that work order spreadsheet in your list of files into just one directory and feed that into the utility. And then afterwards, you get a container file that you can, or a container folder that you can just drag and drop into an Amazon S3 bulk bucket so that it can get ingested by Preservica. The second folder here, the container that has the Notepad++ icon on it is actually a CSV file that I'll show in a second that can be used for quality control. It generates a list of all of the files and their corresponding checksums locally so that then you can also compare programmatically with Preservica at the other end to, again, make sure nothing has been corrupted in transit. Then again, that work order that I mentioned that the NYU plugin generates. At the middle section, these archival object folders each represent a discrete digital asset. And then inside each of those, you have a zipped PAX object, its corresponding metadata, and then you also get metadata for the folder that is within. So this container Notepad++ XML is describing this container file and so on. So again, why actually go to any of this help or to any of this work? Because as we discussed, it is a lot easier to just kind of churn through a script library in VS Code rather than to build a graphical utility around all of this. We don't actually use this locally because it's easier for us to just tinker with scripts a lot of times. But the kind of the point of this was there is like a small community of practice that has been built up around this particular linkage between these two systems, and they just have a lot of frustrations with how fiddly this is and how difficult it can be to implement. So as like a professional service opportunity and a learning opportunity for myself, because I really wanted to learn PySimpleGUI, I've been working on developing the utility to kind of be of service to the rest of that group. But the real big takeaway that I'm excited about is that I think there's just going to be a lot of opportunities to build kind of like small, lightweight, templated utilities that turn scripts into things where you're just pressing buttons or filling in fields for around our university to be able to stand up more complex processes programmatically, but be able to do that in a pretty lightweight fashion. So this was kind of a first example of that. So now and one more cat picture. Thank you for listening. So now we're going to do just a demo and kind of see how this goes. So this is the OPEX PAX utility that is in beautiful Rochester blue and dandelion yellow color scheme that is a little brutal on the eyes. The idea here is that we've got a tabbed display where we have pre-ingest, all the work you need to do to generate those objects that I was describing. And then we have a post-ingest tab where you can do some work actually in Preservica. This uses that PyPreservica library that I was talking about. And then I'd kind of like to build this into more of a utilitarian workbench for kind of all things Preservica and archive space. So for instance, I just have like one little utility here where you can give it a given folder in archive or in Preservica, and it'll give you what the storage total size is for that particular folder. So some other things just to kind of as before we dive into a particular tab, there is the ability to kind of like save oh god, no, this is exactly what I was terrified of. So we're gonna reload that. I think I did things in the wrong order, and this is the other thing that has been really useful for just learning a smidgen about software development is bug fixing, because boy do they show up a lot. It's taking a second to load. There we go. Okay, so the other thing we're gonna check. So we're gonna hit save first. Why is that doing that? Oh God, this just worked. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I knew we should just recorded this or something.
Always the perils with live software, but still,
Okay.
really appreciate seeing it live.
Okay, so we're gonna try and actually set a few settings and see if that makes a difference.
Mhm.
Okay, so clearly there's a bug that I need to fix, but I'm gonna try and do this in a different way. And shoot, actually, oh, that's gonna be pulled from the wrong place. Okay. Whoa. This is what we're gonna try and do.
That Windows 11 right-click options always throws me. I'm still getting used to it.
Yeah, why are you not copying and pasting? Okay. Oh, this is my nightmare. Okay, one last try.
John, there was a permission error that we saw. Maybe just running it as an administrator will work.
Oh, I wonder if thank you. But it's there. Why won't you? I have a feeling that I'm having an issue with our network drives is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for just one quick second, because I have a feeling that the thing that I'm trying to copy, it has plain text passwords in it, so that seems like a bad idea. So sorry, everybody, 1 second.
No
I'm
problem.
really regretting saying that we should record this.
Oh, that's all right. In the meantime, there was a question in the chat, and this can be for you, John, or anyone really. Are there any Python libraries that can be used to package up assets for Archivematica? Would also like to hear about Python libraries for working with metadata in archive space, if you know of any. New to both. Thanks. Me, I think the big thing is probably trying to figure out the APIs between each of those softwares. And it sounded like there were some wrapper, just from the intro that John mentioned, there were some maybe wrapper libraries out there.
For archive space, there's one called Archive Snake, I know, that is a wrapper library for the utility. Yeah, it's a permissions issue. I'm not at my normal desk, and I feel like that's the problem.
That's exactly what happened to me. I remember my first demo. I was requesting some resources from IT, and they asked me to demo this small app. It was big meeting. I was running something from the machine. Of course, it didn't work. But they were very sympathetic and understanding. So I got what I wanted.
Yeah, yeah, it's the usual cube farm sort of life up here. So we have these drop-in rooms so that you're not nattering away in everybody's ear. And apparently they have different permissions. And I don't know through this. So okay, I'm just gonna bring this up real quick just to walk people through it, even if I can't actually run the thing, just to try and provide a conclusion to this sentiment, if that works for folks.
I think that's a good approach. Yeah.
So that I apologize for everybody. So okay, so the idea here is, that same folder that I described in the screenshots, where you're just dumping all of the files themselves and the spreadsheet, you browse to that here. And then again, the nice thing about PySimpleGUI is it has a lot of like shortcut buttons and functionalities. So adding this browse button is as simple as like just like one element in the actual Python. So that brings up a file browser, and then when you, I don't know, let's see if this crashes it too. Then it just inputs it into whatever field is to the left of it. In this case, this big input field. It's easy to drop in drop-down menus and check marks for instance, to define what kind of checksums we want to be generating. And then the same sort of thing here, identifying that spreadsheet. Which in this case, it's kind of nice too. You can limit what files will actually show up. So this is limited to only anything with the .xslx extension, and then also specifies it changes what the label is here to a work order as opposed to like a spreadsheet or something. And again, drops it in here. You can define default values for things. So this is the name of the tab that we're interested in that spreadsheet. And we right now, there's probably a more elegant way to do this, but we just kind of define what the max row is for the spreadsheet, so that it doesn't just try and keep looping through it infinitely. Here we specify, what are the file extensions that we want to put in those representation underscore preservation and representation underscore access, so we can pick those out in particular. This format dates function thing, you can archive space, that spreadsheet spits it out in ISO 8601 format. But if you have this format dates checked, it'll turn it into like a narrative standard American format of, January 8th, 2024, that sort of thing. And then you can also define what the delimiter is between your kind of file name prefix and any sequence numbers that come after that, just to try and provide some adaptability into file naming conventions that might be happening locally. I'm going to try and run this and see what happens. No, and it actually is running. So the other point I was just trying to get at is there's a way to save these settings so that you don't have to keep re-inputting them here, which is something that it didn't want to do. So over here on the right here, then I'm just trying to recreate the kind of like the terminal output as you would see in VS Code, so you can see what's happening here. And then also for any bug fixing as folks use this out in the world, to let me know, where it kind of bombed out and what problems might have been. And then this also just sort of serves generally as sort of a progress bar. And the color here provides some sort of semantic meaning, where the green being where like a function is starting, the blue saying like a specific loop of that function is executing, and the yellow providing the conclusion to what was happening with that function, with finally the kind of orangey color at the bottom saying like the whole process has been completed and we've done the things. So for instance, we create that container file. This is creating that list of the file manifest that has both the file and that's associated checksum, and we just kind of go through all sorts of different functions that sort of continually structure those PAX objects. We don't have to go through every line of this, obviously. And then also just some other kind of general functionality for this as well. You can clear out the terminal window. You can put a context-specific help. So this will give you all of the documentation for this particular tab. But if you switch to one of the other ones and hit help, it'll give you a different set of documentation. As well as a little about button, just saying, where you can find me on the Code4Lib Slack if you have any questions, for instance. I'm just going to see if this wants to work too, just to give another example. So you can also put in your Preservica credentials to then start working on things inside the system post ingest. PySimpleGUI again provides that opportunity to provide a password character, which is nice. Though again, this if the save settings actually functioned, it saves it as just a JSON file that sits next to wherever the executable is. So from like an InfoSec perspective, that's not great, but it is there as an option. To be used at sort of the operator's risk. So in this case, if we hit test connection, this just does, all this is trying to spit back out is the root folder information inside Preservica, but one of the things that you can do after you ingest stuff is a lot of it is just kind of like moving things from one folder to another so that the workflows can execute properly. And this actually gives you the identifiers that you would need here to input into these folder references so that you can move things from one folder to another and then finally to some empty folders that get generated to the trash. And similarly with this quality control, then you navigate to the file manifest that was generated in the first tab and run some quality control to make sure that everything worked properly. So sorry for any hiccups there in the demo. But so again, the idea here is that like a lot of times what I'm doing, or what we're doing is instead running just running raw Python scripts that look more like this, where we can just edit it quickly on the fly. But this provides the opportunity for any like archivists or other folks that are working in your organization where this might be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit more inaccessible to provide a utility that is able for them to work. And again, this is all up on GitHub too, and using the kind of the release functionality to store the executable version of this. This is all Windows only right now. I don't have a Mac to kind of test that, and I'm not familiar. But there is all the raw Python here as well that's used to compile this into an executable. And it is 100% Python. Every single bit of this is Python. There's nothing else in play here. So anyway, thank you everybody for listening, and that is a semi-successful demonstration.
That's really cool to see. Thanks. I mentioned it in the chat, but I really thought the like separate help documentation button right there is pretty neat. So let's see.
Tomasz, this is where I say that I'm a librarian again, and I don't actually know what unit tests are.
Mm-hmm. I did have a couple questions, and I'm not sure. Feel free. I think anyone can jump in with questions at this point too, either in chat, and I'll try to bring a voice to those, or or just hop on the mic, I guess. So the screen that kind of replicated the terminal output, did you have to kind of do a bunch of like print statements for that, or is there a simple way to make that organized and intuitive? Like, was that a PySimpleGUI thing, or was that a whole lot of print at the very end?
So the original version of that was just a whole bunch of print statements, but one of the nice things about PySimpleGUI is that it's got really well-developed coding conventions. So there is like the element, the PySimpleGUI element there is called a multi-line, where it's just like a multi-line object. And there's some the person who created the library, who's got a really good, I think it was Udemy course, a MOOC on how to use PySimpleGUI. It has this convention where it's just there's an update call that you can run to like take this element, update it with a new value, and that includes like an append functionality. So in this case, it was just like every time there was another loop ran, you just took the original value of what was in that multi-line, append the new value, and update it so it's reflected. So you can do it with print statements, but I think there were some formatting reasons it was cleaner and to do it this way, and it also avoids the need to like kind of use new lines and those sorts of characters, and just made it a little bit easier and kind of more working with how the functionality is meant to be used inside PySimpleGUI.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I had one project where was doing a fair amount of those print statements, and it just started getting out of hand. So it's
Yeah.
great to know that there's some stuff out there for that. Um, oh, there's a comment in the chat about unit testing in Python. Thanks, Emil. Um, and then I was going to ask as well. So the idea was to get this to some of the no excuses now, John. Uh, the idea was to get this into the hands of maybe some archivists or people who work with both of these systems. Have you had a good time rolling that out to them? Is there maybe a lot of setup in terms of getting people to have Python and all the appropriate modules and things like that, or any insight there?
Yeah, so that's one of the, I mean, I really do love PySimpleGUI so much. One of the things they did, I can't remember the name of the library right now, but there is a Python library that lets you compile like a folder full of Python files into an executable, and then PySimpleGUI took it even a step further and made it. There's a utility built in PySimpleGUI, of course, called PSG compiler that just kind of shoots out, just gives you an executable at the end as just a very nice clean package. So that was what I ended up using for that. So there you don't have to have Python installed. Like, it takes Python and everything and all of the necessary packages and just wraps them in that executable, which is one of the nice things. The onboarding has been interesting. So all of this assumes like one start of the road data model in archive space, like how that data is described, and so forth, which that's one way to do it in archive space, but there's sort of like dozens of ways you can do archival arrangement. It might be a box forward arrangement or a series forward arrangement or an item forward arrangement. And this assumes just an item forward arrangement so that things have to be described down to the item level. So for next steps, one of the things we're doing that I'm hoping to do, we're hiring a collections lead manager right now in our spec call department. And something I'd like to do is expand kind of the use cases for it to say, like, here are the 5 most common ways to arrange things in archive space or in archival arrangement, and let's build in functionality so it can account for all of them rather than just this one specific one, which I think will make this a lot more utilitarian to the rest of the community. So that it can meet their needs rather than them having to change their workflows to match this tool. Though there is still some of that needs to happen. Like, it can't account for like every file naming convention under the sun, because that would be impossible.
Cool.
I have a question. So, John, how do you ship that app to end users, and how do you handle things like credentials? How do you provide that to them without endangering or exposing them in some way?
Sure. So GitHub is the only way that it gets shipped to whatever user it might be. And then while I included my credentials for this, the idea here is that like they wouldn't even be useful to anyone in their own systems, because they're either on their own enterprise version or at a separate tenancy. So they would have to be supplying their own user credentials with the user with the proper administrative permissions inside Preservica and able to utilize this anyways. So the credentialing doesn't end up being an issue, because that's all just local use. And like, again, you can kind of input them and save them and it ends up getting stored in that JSON file if you want to, or if you want to be a little bit more security conscious, you can just enter them in every time, and just never save a settings file at all.
Well, there is a way and there is a library that allows you to utilize, whether that's Mac or Windows, some credential managers on those operating systems, where presumably, it's a safer way to store that information locally. That's how most of applications, that's a space where most of applications use for this type of information. I don't remember this library out of on top of my head, but I'll search it and I'll post it in a chat.
That would be cool. I mean, because for a lot of this this is just like a script that happens to have a button on top of it almost. Like this isn't like a real, what I would consider like a real software package. So a lot of this has been learning on my part, like the first version of this had no ability to save settings whatsoever. Like you just had, it was just reading directly out of what was in the input fields and drop downs and whatnot. So that was like first step in trying to move it in the right direction. But actually being able to safely secure credentials would be another great enhancement to it.
Yep, I actually remembered keyring.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, it's a really fun library to work with. Like I built my own little note-taking app afterwards, and I've got some other utilities that I'd like to build. It's just fun to make things with PySimpleGUI. The training course, I keep telling people that the developer, the original author of it, created, like he's got this very like Bob Rossian vibe where he's just happy to making these little utilities, and isn't this just a fun little joyous experience? And it's just delightful. So it's been a lot of fun to learn it.
Happy little utilities. I like it.
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
find designing GUI difficult? I mean, you as a creator, you have intimate knowledge how things supposed to work and what's the sequence of actions that are correct. But I'm sure you run into things that someone pressed or did something incorrectly.
Yeah.
There is this challenge how to guide someone to the correct behavior, or at least give them some meaningful error message that um, steers them in the right direction. I feel like this is completely new a level of complexity because it's hard to predict human behavior. And it may be frustrating because something may not work on for someone, but it just I don't know personally. I think it's very very difficult to make some user interface that's somewhat intuitive, and obviously the larger utility, more complex task it is.
Yeah, just hard to agree with that. When I was creating the note-taking app, I kept running into issues where like clicking on one thing would just crash it. So like learning when like, okay, I just need to disable this element entirely until it's actually ready to be interacted with, and then have those like dependencies correctly situated so that they reset at the correct time and so on. So yeah, being able to anticipate those user behaviors and make it so the whole thing doesn't blow up has been wonderful.
So one more question. You mentioned that this application is packaged as a executable file, whatever library. I'm suspecting maybe some PyInstaller or something like that under the
Yeah.
hood. Do you did you run into any problems with again some user permissions, or your users have some extended privileges in the operating system? Because now in I guess most of institutions where our computers are sort of locked and we cannot run arbitrary applications that are not provided by our library. Did you run into this type of problems? And if you did, how did you overcome it?
Yes, actually, I'm pretty sure that's one of the kind of, there's like a disclaimer section in the help documentation that kind of tries to address that, because after a lot of fighting, we've for a lot of our development folks and like in our digital initiatives department locally, we've managed to secure admin access to our machines. So that hasn't been an issue for me personally, but it's been like a warning and disclaimer that like when you run this very unsigned executable locally, your local machine might, kind of balk at the idea, and you might need to be working with your IT department to sort that out. locally just to get the permissions to run it to begin with. So I haven't had any feedback yet that has said that that is an issue, but I'm sort of expecting it to happen at some point. Oh yeah, and for the pathing issues, even for the script library, I had originally the script library that this utility is based on, before I was just concatenating strings, and that was some like really early feedback I got was to use os.path.join instead, and then that would make those path-like objects a lot more portable. So it does assume that. So hypothetically, it should work for Mac, but I think I just would need someone who has like the PSG compiler utility installed on a Mac to actually generate it to whatever the package is for Mac OS.
Yeah, I was gonna also kind of plus one the OS option because there are libraries out there to do it, but I remember one early project where I was working on it and I was switching between my personal machine and my work machine, and I had built it for just an OS path type concatenating and everything like that. So definitely for anyone who switches between machines, keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, I guess we're coming up near the end of the 45-minute session. Are there any last questions? Oh yeah. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate it. I'll stop the recording now.